My name's Daniel, I'm 32, and I live alone in a small town so quiet it barely shows up on any map. Every morning, I wake up promising myself that today will be different, that I'll clean the house, organize the mess I've let pile up, and maybe even start living with purpose. But by noon, the weight of my routine drags me back into the same cycle, and the world outside feels both endless and suffocating. I sip my coffee slowly, staring at the empty kitchen, wondering how I ended up here. Life has a way of settling you into repetition, and for years, I've let it do just that. That morning I was rushing to work, my boots slapping against the pavement, when I saw her sitting on the curb outside the bakery. A young woman, thin as paper, hugging her boy beneath a torn blanket like he was her only anchor in the world. She wasn't begging, not holding a sign, not reaching out, just sitting there, eyes fixed on the ground, as if making herself invisible was safer than being seen. People passed her without a glance, treating her as nothing more than another shadow on the street. But something inside me snapped the moment I laid eyes on them. Her boy looked up at me when I slowed down, his face smeared with dirt, but his eyes wide and impossibly clear. There was a silence in his stare that spoke louder than any words. A silence that told me he had already learned how cruel the world could be. His mother tightened her arms around him, her lips pressed shut like she was bracing for me to say something cruel, to add another scar to a life already filled with them. And yet, I couldn't walk past. Every step away would have felt like betrayal, not only to them, but to the part of me I thought had died years ago. I froze in front of her, unsure of what I could even offer. I didn't have extra money, and God knows I barely had my own life together. My paycheck evaporated into bills, whiskey, and endless repairs. But in that moment, my hands reached into my pocket almost on their own, closing around the cold weight of my house keys. I pulled them out and held them in front of her, and the sunlight caught on the metal as if daring me to follow through. My heart hammered so hard I could barely speak, but the words stumbled out anyway. "Listen," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't have cash, and I'm late for work, but I can give you this." Her eyes darted up to mine, confusion and disbelief mixing in the flicker of her gaze. The boy leaned forward, staring at the keys like they were treasure. For a moment, I wondered if I had completely lost my mind, if the exhaustion of years had finally broken me in half. But then again, maybe it was the first sane thing I'd done in a very long time. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as if the idea was too wild to even form words around. Your house?" she whispered finally, her voice shaking like it hadn't been used in days. People nearby had started to notice. An old man sipping coffee at the diner window, the baker brushing flour from his hands, a teenager locking his bike and staring openly. In a town this small, nothing goes unseen, and gossip blooms faster than weeds. Still, I didn't care. "Yeah," I said firmly, though my insides quivered. "It's not much, just an old farmhouse down the road. But it's warm, and there's food inside. Stay there until I'm back." Her hand hovered near mine, trembling, caught between fear and desperation. For a second, she looked ready to push me away, but the weight of the boy against her chest seemed to tip the balance. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and wrapped her fingers around the keys. As she held them, her son's face lit with a smile so wide it nearly blinded me. I backed away, my throat tight, words gone. "I'll be home around 6, I muttered, my boots suddenly too heavy for the ground beneath me. And then I turned and walked toward work, every step haunted by the possibility that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Or maybe, just maybe, the first right choice in years. She stared at the keys in her hand as if they were a trick, her fingers trembling like she expected them to vanish. Around us, the street slowed. Conversations dipped, footsteps softened, and I felt the weight of every gaze pressing into my back. In a place where secrets are rare and gossip grows like ivy, This would spread faster than fire in dry grass. Still, none of that mattered, because in her silence, I saw a battle raging between fear and hope. The boy tugged gently at her sleeve, his small voice carrying more weight than any adult's. "Mama," he whispered, eyes locked on the keys, eyes shining with something fragile and raw. She looked down at him, brushed dirt from his cheek with a thumb that shook, then lifted her gaze back to me. It was as if she wanted to ask why me, why now? But no sound came. The air between us felt thick, almost holy, like I was intruding on something greater than myself. I forced myself to keep talking, though my throat was tight. "I know how this sounds," I said, lowering my voice so only they could hear. "But I live alone. Nobody's waiting for me at that house. Honestly, it could use a little life inside it. Just please, take it." My words wavered, but my intent stood firm, as though speaking them out loud carved the promise into stone. Finally, she curled her fingers around the keys, slow and uncertain, as if bracing for the ground to collapse beneath her. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, refusing to let them spill where strangers could see. The boy, however, didn't hide his joy. He clutched the keys tight in his small fist, holding them against his chest as though they could guard him from every hunger, every night spent on cold concrete. That sight alone nearly broke me in half. "I'll be back around 6, I said, taking a step back, my boots heavy on the cracked sidewalk. "Help yourself to anything. You don't owe me a thing." My voice was firm, but inside, doubt was crawling through me like ivy, whispering that this could end badly in ways I hadn't thought through. And yet, I knew walking away without doing something would have been worse. So I turned, forcing myself to move, even as every muscle wanted to stay. At work, the machines clanked and hissed, but I barely heard them. My hands tightened bolts, my body went through motions, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, stuck back on that curb with those wide eyes and trembling hands. My co-workers joked, cursed, swapped stories, but their voices washed over me like meaningless noise. All I could see was the image of that boy pressing my house keys against his chest like they were the last safe thing he'd ever been given. Every hour dragged like a chain around my neck, each minute longer than the last. I kept imagining them leaving, disappearing with everything I owned. I saw empty shelves, stolen tools, broken trust, and the echo of my own stupidity. Then, in the next breath, I saw them sitting at my table, eating a meal they hadn't had in days, sleeping in a bed instead of the street. The two versions of the future fought inside me, pulling me apart with every tick of the clock. By the time the whistle blew at 5, I was already halfway out the door. My heart thudded like a drum as I strode through town, the path to my house stretching longer than it ever had before. Doubt gnawed at me with every step, but beneath it was a sliver of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. A dangerous, reckless kind of hope, the kind that makes you believe in miracles, even when the world has taught you better. The gravel crunched under my boots as my farmhouse came into view, and my stomach twisted in knots I couldn't untangle. The porch light glowed softly against the darkening sky, and my breath caught. I hadn't left it on. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, curling upward in pale threads, and I stopped in the yard staring. My house had been a hollow shell for years, cold and lifeless, but now it looked alive. It had been waiting for this moment. Every step toward the door felt heavier, the wood of the porch groaning under my weight like it was carrying my doubt. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob, wondering if I should turn back, if I was strong enough to face what waited inside. My chest heaved as if the air itself was warning me. But then I twisted the knob, pushed the door open, and stepped into a world I hadn't known in years. Warmth hit me first, soft and startling, then the smell of food, real food, not the cans and stale bread I lived on. The kitchen buzzed with quiet life. Gabriel sat at the table, legs swinging as he shoveled soup into his mouth with uncontained joy, grinning through every bite like he had been starving for more than just food. Clara stood at the stove, her back to me, stirring the pot with steady hands. She turned at the creak of the door, and when her eyes met mine, I felt an ache in my chest that wasn't pain, but something dangerously close to relief. She smiled faintly, almost shyly, and for a moment, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like ours. I froze in the doorway, struggling to believe this was real. I had expected betrayal, emptiness, or chaos, but instead, I found warmth, laughter, and the smell of soup filling the cracks of a home I'd long abandoned. Clara gestured for me to sit, her eyes avoiding mine as though afraid to overstep. I obeyed without a word, lowering myself into the chair across from Gabriel. He looked up at me with broth dripping from his chin and grinned wider, and something inside me shifted, fragile and unfamiliar. Dinner passed mostly in silence, broken only by the clatter of spoons and Gabriel's occasional giggles. I kept stealing glances at Clara, at the way she moved quietly around the kitchen, always checking on her boy first. She carried herself like someone used to shrinking, someone who had learned how to disappear in plain sight. But in my kitchen, with the warmth of the stove painting her face, she looked like a woman slowly remembering what it meant to be alive. When she finally sat with her bowl, she thanked me softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak, afraid my own voice would betray how much the moment meant. We ate slowly, savoring each bite as if stretching out the meal could stretch out the safety of the night. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy but warm, like a quilt pulled over weary shoulders. For the first time in years, the house didn't echo with emptiness. It pulsed with life. Later, when Gabriel had fallen asleep on the couch, Clara and I lingered at the table, the lamplight flickering between us. She traced the rim of her bowl absent-mindedly, avoiding my eyes, while I studied the way her shoulders slumped like she had been carrying the weight of the world too long. Neither of us spoke much, but there was something powerful in that silence, an understanding that didn't need words. It was enough for now. As the house settled around us, I leaned back in my chair, staring at the woman and child who had turned my home upside down in less than a day. Questions gnawed at me. Who was she? Where had she come from? What scars did she carry? But I swallowed them down. For tonight, it was enough just to know they were here, alive, safe. I didn't realize then how much my own life was about to change, how deeply the choice I made on that sidewalk would cut into everything I thought I knew. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, painting the wood in gold. Clara moved quietly, making coffee stronger than I liked, her hands steady now where they had trembled yesterday. Gabriel padded into the room, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction, and for a moment, he looked like any other child in the world, safe, ordinary, loved. Watching them, I felt a pang of something dangerously close to longing, the kind I had buried so deep I forgot it could still hurt. We ate breakfast together, toast and eggs fried too crispy, and Clara offered me a small smile between sips of coffee. It was fragile but real, the kind of smile that says thank you without words. Gabriel chattered about the dream he had, his hands waving as he tried to explain every detail, and I listened as though it was gospel. The sound of his laughter filled corners of the house I thought had gone deaf forever. I realized then how much silence had been killing me all those years. At work that day, the whispers had already spread. People looked at me differently, some with suspicion, some with admiration, and others with pity. Bill from the hardware store slapped my shoulder and joked about saints walking among us. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. The gas station clerk gave me a free coffee for the Good Samaritan. And by noon, I knew I had become the story of the week. In a town like this, nothing stays private, and kindness can be mistaken for madness. When I returned home, the house was alive again. Music playing softly from the old radio, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the smell of bread in the oven. Clara had found the flour tucked away in the pantry and baked something that tasted like childhood. We ate together, and she finally spoke more, her voice low but steady, telling me about little things. Favorite foods, books she once read, Gabriel's love for drawing. I didn't press for more, but each word felt like a gift unwrapped slowly. That night, when the dishes were done and Gabriel had drawn a picture of a house with a chimney and 3 stick figures holding hands, I sat staring at it long after they went to bed. The man in the picture wore a cap like mine, crooked and stubborn, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. It wasn't my house he had drawn. It was his idea of home, his dream taking shape in pencil lines. I folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into my jacket pocket like it was something sacred. Hours later, I found myself on the porch, staring at the horizon while the cicadas sang. My chest ached with questions I hadn't asked, doubts I couldn't silence, and fears I wasn't ready to name. What if they left? What if they broke the fragile piece I had just begun to rebuild? What if I lost them before I even understood what they had given me? The night air felt heavy with the weight of possibility, both beautiful and terrifying. As I sat there, I thought about Clara's smile at breakfast, Gabriel's laughter at the table, the smell of bread filling my kitchen. I thought about how empty my life had been before they arrived, and how full it felt now, in just 2 days. It scared me more than anything. The idea that happiness could return, that hope could bloom again, that maybe I wasn't as broken as I believed. But with that fear came a dangerous spark, something I hadn't dared to feel in years. The beginning of wanting more. And yet, beneath all of it, a question lingered, gnawing at me like a shadow I couldn't escape. Had I truly done something good by giving them shelter? Or had I opened the door to a storm that would tear through everything I had left? I didn't know, and as the night deepened, the uncertainty pressed heavier on my chest. Still, I couldn't deny it. The moment Clara and Gabriel stepped into my house, they had already changed me forever. The days began to fall into a rhythm, one I hadn't known I needed until it wrapped around me like a worn quilt. Clara cooked meals that carried warmth I hadn't tasted in years, and Gabriel filled the air with questions, laughter, and that endless curiosity only children have. I found myself coming home with an eagerness that startled me, no longer dragging my boots through the gravel, but rushing to see what small miracle awaited inside. The silence that once strangled these walls was gone, replaced by something I had forgotten: life. But life, as I knew too well, is never so simple. Whispers grew louder in town, carried by mouths that twisted kindness into suspicion. Some called me reckless, others claimed Clara had tricked me, and a few even suggested darker motives. Every glance seemed heavier, every conversation laced with something unspoken. Still, when I stepped into my house each night and saw Gabriel running toward me, arms outstretched, all that noise faded. I told myself their voices didn't matter, even as doubt gnawed quietly at the edges of my mind. One evening, after supper, Clara lingered at the table while Gabriel played with a set of rusty nails I had turned into little soldiers. She looked at me, her eyes holding something heavy, and for the first time she spoke about her past. Her voice cracked as she explained they had left everything behind after her husband's temper turned violent, after bruises became part of her skin and silence became her only shield. She didn't give details, but she didn't need to. The pain in her tone was enough. I listened, my jaw tight, feeling anger boil where pity once sat. Her confession left me restless that night. I walked the porch until the moon climbed high, replaying her words again and again. I thought of the scar she hadn't shown, the way her hands trembled when she first touched those keys, the way Gabriel clung to her like she was both shield and anchor. I had offered them safety, but now I realized it wasn't just about a roof or 4 walls. It was about giving them space to breathe, to heal, to exist without fear. The responsibility pressed against my chest heavier than any workday labor. The next morning, I found Gabriel drawing again, this time sketching a tree with roots stretching deep and wide. He told me it was their new home, a place where nothing could pull them away. Clara watched him quietly, her lips pressed together, her eyes shimmering with something she didn't say out loud. I ruffled his hair, forcing a smile, but inside, I felt the weight of his words. A home wasn't just something I could give. It was something I had to fight to protect, even if I didn't yet know from what. At work, I caught Bill watching me from across the floor, his expression sharp and questioning. Later, he pulled me aside, warning me in a low voice that people were starting to talk too much, that kindness could turn dangerous in a town that thrived on suspicion. I brushed him off, but the warning clung to me like a shadow. Every decision I made suddenly felt like a gamble, as though one wrong step could tip everything into ruin. I hated that fear, hated that others could plant it so easily inside me. That evening, Clara surprised me by setting aside a portion of soup for the old man who lived down the road. She asked if I'd deliver it, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching, and I realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was giving back. It struck me then how strong she truly was. How beneath all the fear and silence lived a woman who refused to be broken. Carrying that pot of soup down the road, I felt a strange pride swell inside me, the kind that makes your chest ache and your steps lighter. When I returned, the house glowed with lamplight, Gabriel asleep on the couch, Clara waiting quietly at the table. She thanked me, not just for the errand, but for everything, and though her words were simple, they carried more weight than any grand speech could. I sat across from her, the silence between us softer now, almost comforting. For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe this was more than temporary, that maybe fate had carved this path for a reason. And in that fragile belief, I felt a flicker of hope that scared me as much as it saved me. The next weeks passed in a blur of small moments that stitched themselves into something bigger. I found Clara humming while she worked, her voice soft but steady, filling corners of the house I thought had forgotten sound. Gabriel followed me everywhere, asking endless questions about tools, machines, and the way the world worked, his laughter turning even the hardest tasks into something lighter. Nights grew warmer, not because of the stove, but because the emptiness that once echoed in my walls had been replaced by the rhythm of their lives. But even in the comfort, unease lurked. At the hardware store, I overheard whispers sharp enough to cut. Warnings about strays who take everything and vanish, mutters about me being a fool. When I caught sight of Clara in town, I noticed how people's eyes lingered, not with kindness but with judgment, stripping her down with cruel curiosity. She felt it too. I could see the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her hand tightened on Gabriel's when those looks burned too long. It wasn't fair, but small towns rarely were. One evening, Gabriel asked if they could plant a tree in the yard. He said it would be theirs, proof that they belonged, something no one could take away. Clara hesitated, her lips parting as if to say no, but then she looked at me, searching for permission. I nodded, and the boy's grin nearly split his face. The next day, we planted a sapling near the porch, Gabriel patting the soil with his small hands while Clara whispered something under her breath, something that sounded like a prayer. That tree became a symbol before I even realized it. Every morning, Gabriel checked its leaves, watered the roots, and talked to it as though it could hear him. Clara watched with a soft smile, one that carried both pride and sadness, like she wasn't sure they deserved something so permanent. And me? I watched them both, feeling something grow inside me that I couldn't name, something both terrifying and beautiful. That tree wasn't just theirs. It was ours, a fragile promise rooted in soil and hope. Still, the town didn't let me forget its doubts. One afternoon, the sheriff stopped me outside the feed store, his hat tipped low, his tone casual but firm. He asked if I knew who they really were, if I understood the risk I had taken. I met his gaze and said I didn't care, that whatever their story was, it didn't change what I'd seen in their eyes. He shook his head, muttering about trouble finding me sooner or later, and walked away. His words clung like burrs, sharp and impossible to shake. That night, Clara noticed the tension in my shoulders as I sat at the table staring into nothing. She asked quietly what was wrong, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I didn't tell her everything, but I admitted the town was stirring, that people were questioning us. She stayed silent, her eyes lowering, as though she had expected this from the beginning. Finally, she whispered, "They don't know me. They don't know us." And though her words were soft, they carried the steel of someone who had survived too much to be broken by whispers. Days later, Gabriel ran in from the yard, clutching a flower he had picked near the creek. He handed it to Clara, his face glowing, and she pressed it between the pages of a book she had found on my shelf. She told him it was a way of keeping beauty safe, even when it faded. Watching them, I realized she was teaching him something bigger, how to hold on to hope, even when the world tried to strip it away. And in that lesson, I felt myself learning too. By the end of that week, I caught myself thinking less about what the town said and more about what we were building inside these walls. The whispers still lingered, sharp and cruel, but the sound of Gabriel's laughter, the sight of Clara smiling over a cup of coffee, the feel of a home that finally breathed again, they were louder. And for the first time, I wondered if love, in its quietest, simplest form, could drown out even the harshest of voices. The rain came hard one Friday night, drumming against the roof like an angry hand demanding to be let in. I sat by the window, watching the world blur into silver streaks, when I noticed Clara standing at the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She didn't move until I joined her, and even then she didn't speak, her eyes fixed on the sapling trembling under the storm. Gabriel was asleep inside, but I could feel her fear in the way her breath shuddered, as though every drop of rain reminded her of nights when safety was nowhere to be found. I placed my coat over her shoulders, and only then did she lean closer, her voice breaking as she admitted that storms used to mean danger for her and Gabriel. She told me about nights when she'd gather him in her arms, hiding in corners while her husband raged through the house, the thunder outside blending with the thunder inside. Her words cut through me, sharper than the rain, and all I could do was hold her, letting the storm rage around us while promising, silently, that those nights were gone. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The next morning, sunlight broke through, and Gabriel ran straight to the sapling, squealing that it had survived. Clara laughed softly, a sound that still startled me, and for a moment, I felt like the storm had been a test we'd all passed together. Yet beneath that laughter, I sensed the shadows hadn't fully lifted. She carried her past like a scar beneath clothing, hidden but never gone. And I realized that part of offering them safety wasn't just giving them space, but also standing against the ghosts that still chase them. Later that week, Gabriel insisted I teach him how to hammer nails properly. We set up wood planks in the yard, his tiny hands gripping the hammer with determination, his tongue poking out as he focused. Clara watched from the porch, her expression a mix of pride and nerves, and I couldn't help but smile as he celebrated every crooked nail as though he'd built a cathedral. He didn't see mistakes, only victories. And watching him, I wondered how many times I had forgotten that lesson myself. That evening, Clara surprised me by pulling out an old photograph she had kept hidden in her bag. It showed her younger, her smile wide, holding Gabriel as a baby, her eyes still full of light. She placed it in my hand and whispered that she wanted me to know she hadn't always been broken. There was a time when joy wasn't a stranger, and she hoped one day to feel that again. The honesty in her voice left me breathless, and I realized how much trust it took for her to let me hold even a piece of that memory. At work, Bill cornered me again, his patience thinner than ever. He demanded to know if I understood what I was risking, his words sharp, his eyes cold. I snapped for the first time, telling him he didn't get to judge me, not when he'd never offered a hand to anyone who needed it. The room went quiet, the weight of my anger hanging heavy, but I didn't regret it. Walking away, I realized I had crossed a line. Choosing them wasn't just kindness anymore. It was loyalty, fierce and unshakable. That night, as Clara and I cleaned up after dinner, she asked what was bothering me. I lied at first, brushing it off, but then the truth slipped out in pieces. The whispers, the warnings, the threat of losing everything if people decided we didn't belong. She listened silently, her hands steady as she wiped the table. And when I finally stopped, she said something I'll never forget. "We've already lost everything once. We can't be afraid to live again." Her words sank deep, a reminder that fear couldn't be the foundation of our home. When I finally lay down that night, I couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, the town was still watching, but the house, our house, was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Gabriel's soft snores, Clara's quiet breathing, the warmth in the walls. It was fragile but real. And I knew then that I wasn't just protecting them anymore. I was protecting something inside myself, something I hadn't dared to believe in for years. A second chance, fragile as glass, but worth every risk. The next Sunday, Clara suggested we walk into town together. At first, I hesitated, knowing the eyes that would follow us, the whispers that would trail behind like shadows. But Gabriel's excitement was too much to deny, and so we went, the three of us moving through streets that suddenly felt narrower. Heads turned, conversations paused, and I felt the weight of every stare pressing down. Clara kept her chin high, Gabriel clung to her hand, and I forced my own step steady, determined not to let the world see how heavy it felt. We stopped at the diner, a place I hadn't visited in months, and slid into a booth near the window. Gabriel's face lit up at the sight of pancakes dripping with syrup, and for a moment, even the stares faded as laughter filled our corner. Clara thanked me softly, her voice carrying relief, as though even this simple act of eating in public was a victory. But beneath it all, I felt the tension crackle like static, waiting for someone to strike a match. And of course, someone did. A woman from across the room leaned toward her companion, her voice not as hushed as she thought, asking how long I planned on keeping strays under my roof. The word hit like a slap, my hands tightening on the table as heat rushed to my face. Clara stiffened, Gabriel looking between us in confusion, his fork paused midair. For a second, I wanted to lash out, to let anger explode, but instead, I took a slow breath and forced a smile for Gabriel. He didn't need to carry the weight of their cruelty. When we left the diner, Clara's silence was heavy. She walked quickly, her shoulders tense, her grip on Gabriel firm. I caught up to her, telling her not to listen, that people talked because they didn't understand. She stopped suddenly, turning to me with eyes full of fire, saying she was tired of not being seen for who she was. Tired of being judged for scars no one had the right to measure. It wasn't anger at me. It was anger at a world that kept trying to erase her. And in that moment, I saw her strength burn through her fear. Back at the house, Gabriel dragged us outside to check on the sapling. He pointed proudly at the first tiny bud forming, his voice full of wonder, declaring it proof that things could grow even when people didn't believe they would. Clara knelt beside him, tears in her eyes as she touched the leaf gently, as though it were a miracle. Watching them, I realized the truth in his words. The world might not want them to grow roots here, but roots had a way of reaching deep when no one was watching. That evening, Clara sat with me on the porch, the silence between us different this time. She admitted she almost hadn't come with me that day, afraid the weight of judgment would crush her. But she was glad she had. She said Gabriel needed to see that they could still walk through the world without bowing their heads, That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving anyway. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear, and for the first time, I believed she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. I thought of all the nights I had spent alone in this house, convincing myself it was enough to simply exist. And now here they were, teaching me the difference between living and hiding. Gabriel's laughter, Clara's resilience, even the small saplings swaying in the wind. They were reminders that life wasn't meant to be endured quietly. It was meant to be faced, even when the world pressed hard against you. And maybe, just maybe, I was starting to learn that lesson too. As the stars came out, Clara whispered a quiet thank you, not for the house or the food, but for believing in them when no one else did. Her words settled deep, heavier than any praise I'd ever known. I looked at her, at Gabriel asleep against her shoulder, at the house glowing softly behind us, and felt something I hadn't in years: certainty. Whatever came next, whatever the town decided, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something worth defending, and that realization filled me with both fear and hope in equal measure. The following week, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting through the house, a sound so alien to these walls that for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. Gabriel was in the kitchen, a mixing bowl too big for his hands, flour dusting the air like snow as Clara guided him through making pancakes. She glanced at me with a sheepish grin when I stepped in, embarrassed at the mess, but to me it was beautiful. A reminder that chaos could also mean joy. For years this kitchen had been silent. Now it felt alive, warm, and impossibly human. As we sat down to eat, Gabriel insisted his pancakes were the best in town, his pride radiating brighter than the morning sun. Clara laughed, the kind of laugh that carried ease instead of weight, and I found myself staring longer than I should have. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition, a recognition that she was finally glimpsing herself beyond survival, and that Gabriel was discovering the comfort of stability. My heart ached with a strange mixture of joy and fear, because I knew happiness made us vulnerable too. Later that day, I received a call from my sister, someone I hadn't spoken to much since all this began. She asked why the town was buzzing with rumors about me harboring strangers. Her voice was sharp, laced with judgment, and though she loved me, she couldn't hide her doubt. I tried explaining, telling her about Clara and Gabriel, about the strength and hope they carried, but she interrupted, asking what would happen when gratitude wasn't enough. I hung up shaken, realizing that even family might not stand with me when the line was drawn. That night, Clara noticed my silence and pressed gently, her eyes searching mine until I admitted the truth. I told her about my sister, about the way her words stung worse than strangers' whispers, because they came from someone who was supposed to know me. Clara's hand brushed mine across the table, her voice soft but firm as she reminded me that family wasn't just blood. Sometimes, it was the people who chose to stand with you when no one else did. Her words felt like both comfort and a vow, and I clung to them quietly. The days that followed brought small, ordinary victories. Gabriel started drawing again, filling pages with pictures of houses, trees, and sometimes us, stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. Clara began humming while she cleaned, melodies without names, but carrying fragments of peace. And me, I started looking forward to evenings, when the three of us would sit together after dinner, the silence no longer heavy but shared. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it was healing, and I realized that was rarer than anything I had ever known. Still, the weight of the town pressed closer. People crossed the street rather than greet me, conversations hushed as I passed, and once, a note appeared under my door. "They don't belong here." The letters were sharp, written with anger that seeped off the page, and though I tore it up, the words lingered in my chest. Clara saw the change in my posture, the way I lingered near windows at night, and though I didn't tell her about the note, I think she already knew. Fear doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. One evening, Gabriel climbed onto my lap with a book, demanding I read aloud. His weight settled against me, his small hand holding mine steady on the page. And as I read, I felt a knot loosen in my chest. This was what I was fighting for. Not an idea, not a cause, but moments like this, where innocence was protected, where laughter could grow louder than fear. Clara watched from the couch, her eyes shimmering with gratitude, and I knew then that no note, no whisper, no judgment could make me walk away. That night, when the house was quiet, I stood by the window, looking out at the dark street. Somewhere in that darkness were people who disapproved, who wanted this experiment of hope to end. But inside, behind me, was light, warmth, and a fragile sense of belonging. And I understood that every choice had already been made. I was in this fully, no matter the cost. Whatever storm was coming, I was ready to face it. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about us. The storm arrived sooner than I thought. Not with thunder, but with a knock on the door one cold evening. Clara froze in the kitchen, Gabriel clutching her leg as I moved to answer. On the porch stood the sheriff, his hat pulled low, his face lined with discomfort. He wasn't an unkind man, but he carried the weight of the town on his shoulders, and I could see in his eyes that this visit wasn't his choice alone. He cleared his throat, saying complaints had been filed, that questions were being asked about my guests. His voice was formal, but his eyes betrayed unease. I invited him in. Offering coffee, he politely declined, and the air between us thickened with what neither of us wanted to say. He asked how long Clara and Gabriel planned on staying, his tone careful, almost apologetic, but the question cut deep. Clara's face went pale, Gabriel's small fingers digging into her hand as though he understood more than I wished he did. I told the sheriff they could stay as long as they needed, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. His sigh carried both relief and warning, and I knew the matter wasn't closed. After he left, silence settled heavy in the house. Clara sat at the table, staring at nothing, her hands trembling slightly. She whispered that she didn't want to cause trouble, that maybe it would be safer if they left. The words pierced me, and before I could think, I reached across the table, insisting she was wrong. I told her this house wasn't charity. It was theirs too, as much as it was mine. Her eyes filled with tears, but behind them was a spark, faint but fierce, and I prayed she believed me. The following days, whispers grew louder. I overheard conversations at the store, saw curtains twitch when I walked past, felt the sting of isolation sharpen. And yet, within the house, something else grew stronger. A unity, a quiet defiance. Gabriel asked if we could plant another tree beside the sapling, and though winter was coming, I agreed. Together, we dug into the cold earth, our breaths visible in the chill, and planted hope anyway. Clara stood beside us, her smile small but unbroken, and in that act, I felt something anchor deeper inside me. One evening, I found Clara sitting by the window, Gabriel asleep in her lap, her gaze lost in the night. When I asked what she was thinking, she admitted she was terrified. Not of leaving, but of staying, of daring to believe this could be real. She confessed that sometimes happiness felt like a trap, something that could vanish at any moment. I listened quietly, then told her the truth, that I was scared too, but that fear didn't mean we couldn't build something worth holding onto. She nodded slowly, and for once, didn't look away. A week later, Gabriel handed me a drawing he had worked on in secret. It was of our house, but brighter, fuller, surrounded by trees and sunlight. In the drawing, we were all outside together, smiling. I couldn't help but stare at it, the innocence and hope etched in crayon lines more powerful than any speech. Clara saw it too, her eyes softening, and for a moment, the fear that usually haunted her seemed to dissolve. That drawing wasn't just a picture. It was a blueprint of what could be, If only we had the courage to keep believing. But the world outside didn't relent. A brick appeared one morning at the edge of the porch, not thrown, just placed, with a note tied around it. "Go back where you came from." Clara found it first, her face tightening as she tucked it into her pocket before Gabriel could see. She didn't tell me right away, but when she finally did, I felt the anger rise hot and uncontrollable. Yet, instead of fear, what I saw in her eyes was resolve. "They want us gone," she said. "But maybe it's time we showed them we're not leaving." Her voice was steady, her choice made. That night, as I lay in bed, sleep far from reach, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about shelter anymore, or about protecting Clara and Gabriel. It was about standing against something larger. The fear that kept people from seeing each other as human. And as terrifying as it was, I understood something else. Once you choose to fight for hope, there's no turning back. The line had been drawn, and we were already on the side we were meant to be. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The morning air was crisp, almost biting, as I stepped onto the porch and saw Clara kneeling by the sapling, her hands deep in the cold soil. Gabriel crouched beside her, small fingers brushing the roots with care, his face lit with excitement. I watched them, a lump in my throat, realizing the house had truly become a home. Not just for them, but for me too. The walls that once echoed emptiness now hummed with life, each creak and groan a note in the melody of this fragile family. But beneath the warmth, unease lingered. I felt it in the stiff way Clara carried herself when neighbors passed, the subtle tension that never fully left her. She had survived horrors I couldn't erase, and though I wanted to shield her, I knew I couldn't erase the memories that clung to her like shadows. Gabriel, oblivious to it all, laughed and ran in circles, and I let his joy be my reminder that life could bloom even in hard soil. Later, I decided to check on the shed behind the house, a place I hadn't visited in weeks. The old wood smelled of rain and rot, and as I opened the door, my chest tightened. Tools lay scattered, some rusted, some missing, and I realized this little corner of my property mirrored the chaos outside. Fragile, unkempt, but still mine to fix. The thought struck me sharply. Protecting this home wasn't just about walls and food. It was about rebuilding trust, repairing what life had worn down. That evening, we ate together at the table as if nothing outside existed. Clara carved slices of bread with care. Gabriel shuffled his plate, and I poured tea I didn't feel I deserved. The warmth of their presence filled every crack in me I hadn't known existed. I saw her glance at me, subtle but unmistakable, her hand brushing against mine ever so lightly. It was a reminder that connection could grow in the quietest of moments, where words weren't always necessary. Later, I sat on the porch alone, staring at the sapling now taller, sturdier, and more alive than the day we planted it. I thought about the town, the whispers, the notes, the judgment, and felt a surge of resolve. Whatever storms came, we had created a space where hope could take root, and that hope could not be pried away. Clara and Gabriel had taught me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but choosing to move forward despite it. The following week, I noticed a stranger watching the house from across the street. His coat was heavy, his stance deliberate, and my gut twisted at the sight. I didn't recognize him, but the tension in his posture screamed trouble. Clara saw him too, and I watched her instinctively shield Gabriel, her body taut with protective energy. I clenched my fists, realizing the world outside our walls might finally be testing the strength of the home we had built. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every wind gust, every distant bark sounded louder than it should. I kept imagining the stranger returning with others, imagining their intentions, imagining the fragility of our new life crumbling under weight I wasn't ready to carry. I stood on the porch until dawn, my eyes tracing shadows, my heart hammering, knowing that protecting them might demand more than kindness. It might demand action I wasn't sure I could take. At sunrise, I finally went inside, exhausted but resolute. Clara and Gabriel were asleep, innocent and unaware, and I watched them quietly, feeling both the vulnerability and the strength of this fragile family. I realized then that everything I had done, every risk, every choice, was building toward a moment that would test us in ways I couldn't yet see. And deep down, I knew that moment was coming, and I had to be ready. A few days later, the town erupted in whispers louder than ever. Someone had mentioned Clara and Gabriel to the mayor. A rumor spun out of fear and ignorance. I felt eyes on the house constantly, and even the children at the corner store stopped to stare. Clara moved carefully through the rooms, her expression taut, while Gabriel ran ahead, blissfully unaware. The contrast between their innocence and the weight pressing on us was almost unbearable. Yet it reminded me why I couldn't turn back. One evening, I found Clara sitting at the table with a stack of letters, her fingers tracing the edges nervously. She explained they were eviction notices, threats and warnings disguised as bureaucracy. She looked up at me, eyes pleading, but there was also fire in them, anger, defiance, and resolve. I realized then that our struggle wasn't just against whispers or stares. It was against a system that had failed them long before I had ever appeared. I made a decision that night. We wouldn't cower. The next morning, I went out to the street and faced the neighbors whose stares had followed us. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I only told them this. Clara and Gabriel were safe, and if anyone tried to take that from them, they would have to go through me. Some shifted uncomfortably, some scoffed, but a few nodded, quietly respecting a line that had been drawn. I returned home, heart pounding, feeling the weight of both fear and newfound authority. That night, Gabriel asked why people were upset. I struggled to answer simply, fearing words might taint his innocence. Clara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, telling him that some people fear what they don't understand, and that was why kindness sometimes needed courage. I watched them both, realizing the life I thought I was giving them was actually what they were giving me. A chance to grow, to stand, to fight for something bigger than myself. Days passed, and life began to settle again, cautiously, but still with tension under every surface. I kept a watchful eye on the house, repairing what needed fixing, keeping routines that offered stability. Gabriel drew, laughed, and ran outside. Clara hummed, cooked, and repaired her own confidence one small victory at a time. And me? I learned that home wasn't just walls, meals, or safety. It was the courage to defend what you loved against a world that didn't always care. Then came the evening that would change everything. I returned from work, boots splashing through the gravel, and froze. The door was ajar, slightly swinging, and inside, the house looked transformed. Every room carried life, laughter, warmth, and something more. Clara was arranging furniture in ways she hadn't before. Gabriel was dancing around a new drawing on the wall. And I realized the home I thought I had built had become theirs fully, in ways I hadn't expected. I stepped inside slowly, voice caught in my throat, and Clara turned toward me with a smile so wide, so unapologetically real, it stunned me. Gabriel waved a crayon-stained hand, laughing, shouting that I was home and that everything was perfect. The realization hit me hard. They hadn't just survived. They had transformed this house, this life, and even me. In one day, fear had turned into celebration, and I understood that what we created together was more than shelter. It was life renewed. As night fell, I sat on the porch, staring at the lights inside, and a thought struck me like lightning. For years, I had felt trapped, each day blending into the next, nothing changing. And yet here they were, 9 words, simple choices, actions of courage, had begun something inside me, aligning chances, opening doors, transforming my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. I smiled, heart full, knowing that anyone could feel this difference too, if they started with just 9 words. For those curious, I left a sign in the commentario Fixadu Abexo, and everything began there. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting golden streaks across the living room. Gabriel was sprawled on the rug, coloring furiously, while Clara moved around the kitchen with effortless grace, humming softly. I stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, taking it all in, the sound, the warmth, the sense that this was finally real. My chest ached with gratitude and disbelief. After so long of solitude, I was finally part of something that mattered. Each small gesture, each laugh, each shared glance felt like a victory against the emptiness I'd carried for years. Still, the outside world hadn't stopped pressing in. A letter arrived that afternoon, anonymous and scrawled with warnings about interfering with others' lives. Clara's hands trembled as she read it, but she didn't let Gabriel see. She tucked the paper into her pocket, her jaw tight, and whispered that we would ignore it. I felt a surge of pride for her, but also a heavy knot of worry. Threats like these were small, but they could grow, and I knew the world could be cruel to those who dared hope. Later, I caught Gabriel climbing the sapling in the yard, chattering happily about a bird's nest he wanted to build. Clara chased after him, laughing despite herself, and I stood back, feeling that fragile balance between chaos and peace. I realized that life wasn't about perfection, but about holding on to moments like these. Even when the world tried to drag you under, I leaned against the porch rail, letting the sun warm my back, thinking about how different this felt from the isolation of my old days. At dinner, Clara told me about a program that could help Gabriel with school, a chance he never would have had living in shelters. Her eyes sparkled as she explained, and I realized she was planning a future, daring to dream beyond survival. I felt a strange mixture of awe and responsibility. Hope came with expectations, and we had to meet them. But I also knew this. If we could survive the past, we could face the challenges ahead. That night, I checked the locks on the doors, more out of habit than necessity. Each click echoed louder than usual, a reminder of the constant tension that lurked outside our walls. Clara watched me quietly, sensing the weight pressing down on me. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough to steady my thoughts. In silence, I realized that protection wasn't just physical. It was about preparing ourselves mentally, emotionally, and together. The next morning, the town's whispers came again, but this time I faced them with a new courage. I met people on the street with a firm nod, silent but clear, signaling that we weren't going anywhere. Some looked away, uneasy, others murmured, but I held my ground. I returned home to find Clara arranging fresh flowers on the counter, Gabriel showing me his latest drawing, and for a moment, I believed that the world outside could never touch this sanctuary. Later that week, a neighbor brought over a plate of cookies, shy and apologetic. Clara accepted them gracefully, and I noticed how small gestures like this began to soften the invisible lines of tension. Life was starting to bleed through the cracks in the walls we built, and slowly, carefully, trust began to return. I watched Clara's shoulders relax, Gabriel laugh freely, and I felt a quiet victory bloom in my chest. As night fell, I stood on the porch again, staring at the stars. I thought about all the days that had passed, dark, heavy, endless, and realized that we had carved something extraordinary from them. Each choice, each small act of courage had brought us here, and I knew that the real journey wasn't over. It was just beginning, and together, we would face whatever came next. The following week brought unexpected news. Gabriel's school accepted him into a special program. Clara cried softly when I told her, her hand on mine, whispering thanks for making this possible. I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Hope, tangible and immediate, filling the cracks where fear used to live. We celebrated quietly, just the three of us, and the house hummed with laughter that lingered long after the dishes were washed. Every corner felt alive, every room a testament to the choices we had made. Yet, even in this happiness, shadows lingered. One evening, a knock echoed through the house, and I found a man at the door, a stranger with a sharp gaze and a name I didn't recognize. He introduced himself politely, but with a tension that made my gut twist, asking questions about Clara and Gabriel. I answered carefully, my mind racing with possibilities. Clara stayed behind me, silent, protective, while Gabriel peeked from the corner, curious but unaware of the danger. That night, I lay awake, thinking about the stranger's words and the subtle threats behind them. I realized that kindness often invites scrutiny, that opening your life to others can expose you to risk. But I also understood that retreating from life wasn't an option. We had built too much, fought too hard. Clara's trust, Gabriel's innocence, and the warmth of our home demanded that we face the world, not hide from it. The weight of responsibility pressed down, but I welcomed it. The next morning, I took a walk around the property, clearing my mind and planning contingencies. I checked the locks, the windows, and even the fences, ensuring that the sanctuary we had built was safe. Gabriel trailed behind me, asking endless questions about why things were done a certain way. And I answered, careful to instill both knowledge and courage. Clara joined us, and I realized that safety wasn't just about walls. It was about teaching resilience, giving Gabriel tools to thrive no matter the world outside. By midweek, the house buzzed with small victories. Clara baked bread, Gabriel drew, and I fixed the fence that had begun to sag. The outside world's judgment felt distant, almost irrelevant, when compared to the life growing within these walls. I watched them both, feeling a strange pride and humility at the same time. Pride for what we had built and humility at how fragile it all still was. Life had returned, delicate and breathtaking. One evening, as we sat together by the fireplace, Clara shared more of her past. Her voice trembled as she described nights on the streets, hiding from the cold, her arms wrapped around Gabriel, her heart heavy with fear. I listened quietly, imagining the darkness she had endured, and I realized how extraordinary her courage was. She hadn't just survived. She had fought to protect the smallest spark of hope, and now we were all standing in its light. Later that night, I stepped outside, the stars cold and distant above me. I thought about the stranger, the threats, and the whispers, and I made a vow. No matter what came next, we wouldn't be cowed. Clara and Gabriel deserved this life, this home, and I would stand as the shield, no matter the cost. Courage, I realized, wasn't a choice anymore. It was a necessity. As sleep finally claimed me, I felt a strange calm. The world outside might judge, whisper, or threaten, but inside, we had carved a sanctuary of trust, hope, and love. And I understood fully that the steps we had taken to protect this family had also begun to transform me. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I woke to Gabriel laughing in the kitchen, flour dusting his hair and cheeks, while Clara stirred eggs with careful precision. I watched them for a moment, heart swelling, realizing how much life we had carved out of fear and uncertainty. The house felt alive, warm, like a safe harbor after years of storms. For the first time in ages, I felt truly at peace, knowing that this fragile balance was real and ours. Every small victory, every shared smile felt monumental, a reminder that life could be rebuilt with patience and courage. Still, the world outside wasn't silent. A knock came at the door mid-afternoon, and I found the same stranger from before, his eyes sharper now, his tone colder. He asked questions about Clara's past, about how long we planned to stay, his politeness thin as ice. Clara stepped behind me, protective, while Gabriel peeked around her legs, unaware of the tension. I kept my voice steady, replying carefully, knowing that one misstep could change everything we'd built in an instant. Later, I found Clara on the porch, whispering to herself as she traced the lines of the sapling's new leaves. I asked her what she was thinking, and she admitted fear for what might come next, fear that our fragile peace could be shattered. I took her hand, told her that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about standing firm despite it. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt her trust fully settle on me, unshakable and real. By evening, we cooked dinner together, laughter filling every corner of the house, the previous tension momentarily forgotten. Gabriel ran circles around the kitchen, pretending the floor was lava, while Clara chased him, giggling, her voice light and free. I leaned against the counter, sipping tea, realizing that these small moments were the foundation of everything we had fought for. The house wasn't just a building. It was a promise, a sanctuary where hope could grow even in hardened hearts. After dinner, I sat with Clara on the porch, watching Gabriel play with shadows cast by the street lamp. She spoke softly about dreams she'd once had, dreams abandoned in fear and necessity, and I encouraged her to revisit them. Her smile was hesitant but genuine, a spark of the woman she had always been beneath the weight of life's hardships. In that quiet moment, I understood that protecting them wasn't just about safety. It was about nurturing the courage to dream again. The night deepened, and I finally stepped inside, checking each room, each lock, ensuring that everything was secure. My mind wandered to the stranger, to the town, to the whispers and the judgments we'd faced. Yet inside, I felt a steady fire, a determination rooted in love and shared struggle. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving quietly, fiercely, and no outside force could take that from us unless we let it. I sat alone in the living room, listening to Clara humming softly as she cleaned, the sound almost magical in its normalcy. I realized that home wasn't about walls or locks. It was about people choosing to stay, to fight, and to love, despite the odds. And in that understanding, I felt a deep, almost physical shift inside me, a recognition that everything we'd built had already changed me, shaping me into someone capable of more than I ever imagined. Before turning in, I paused by the window, looking out at the quiet street, and thought about how far we'd come. From fear to hope, from strangers to family. The journey had been relentless but transformative. And deep down, I sensed that the final chapter wasn't about endings. It was about unlocking a power within ourselves, a spark that would guide us through whatever came next. In that quiet night, I knew change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The next day, I walked through the house, noting the small transformations. The sapling blooming, Gabriel's latest drawing pinned to the fridge, Clara's laughter echoing down the hallway. Everything was alive with evidence of life, hope, and courage. And then it hit me. The realization of what we'd accomplished and how much it had changed me struck harder than anything before. I remembered the days when I felt trapped, when every morning blurred into the next, and I smiled at how far we'd come. For years, I had felt stuck, as if nothing I did mattered, each day repeating without hope or progress. But then, almost by accident, I discovered something incredibly simple, something that sparked an energy within me I hadn't known existed. 9 words. 9 words, repeated the right way, unlocking opportunities, aligning life, and transforming how I saw the world. I whispered them quietly at first, then with conviction, and felt a shift I couldn't deny. The changes started small, people appearing at the right time, ideas flowing freely, chances opening up as if the universe itself had rearranged to favor us. Every day, the magic of those words built upon itself, and I realized that the life we'd fought to create was just the beginning. I felt empowered, alive, and more connected to Clara and Gabriel than ever before. Our home wasn't just shelter. It was a magnet for possibility and hope, fueled by intention and belief. I shared this quietly with Clara, showing her how simple repetition could spark courage, opportunities, and confidence. She tried it, hesitated, then smiled as she felt its effect. Gabriel, innocent and curious, followed along, turning the words into a daily game, his laughter echoing the change they brought. And I watched them, astonished, realizing that anyone could tap into this, transform their life, if they embraced it fully. The house seemed to hum with a new energy, every corner vibrating with potential. Doors opened, neighbors softened, and small miracles began to unfold naturally around us. Even the saplings seemed taller, stronger, a living testament to what intention and care could do. Clara looked at me, her eyes wide, whispering that she felt it too, the invisible tide shifting in our favor. I nodded, understanding that life had finally found its rhythm again. For those curious, I left a sign in the pinned comment below, and everything started there. I explained how 9 words, repeated correctly, could align opportunities, open doors, and shift perspective. The joy on Clara's face, the curiosity in Gabriel's eyes, and my own astonishment confirmed that this simple tool was powerful. And I realized that sharing it didn't diminish its magic, it multiplied it. From that day, life flowed differently. The house, once a fragile sanctuary, became a beacon of possibility, love, and courage. I understood that our struggles, fears, and choices had all led to this. An unexpected transformation that began with trust, care, and 9 simple words. And now, anyone could start their own journey, unlocking opportunities and hope, just as we had, from the first whisper of intention to the last laugh echoing through the halls. As night fell and the stars shone over the quiet street, I stood on the porch, looking at the life we had rebuilt. Clara rested inside with Gabriel asleep, the house glowing softly around them. I whispered the 9 words one last time, feeling the energy ripple through me, knowing that this was just the beginning of endless possibilities. And in that moment, I understood fully. The power to transform life, to create hope and abundance, belonged to anyone willing to start, beginning with those 9 words.